What's the most challenging part of working on a movie like Detective Pikachu, which is what, CG and live action, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there were a lot of challenging things about that one in particular because, first of all, I think the hardest part was the fact that it was Detective Pikachu. It wasn't the anime. It wasn't the games. It was Detective Pikachu game. But even at that time,
Mm.
that game was only out in Japan. So we couldn't even really play it at that time. We got a script of the translation of the game, which was great, and the game is awesome. But it unlike something like it's Ash and his Pikachu, or it's things that Pokemon training and battling and Pokeballs, like
There.
all of that was kind of not on the menu. Ultimately, there is a Pokeball in the movie for, like, if you notice, there's only one scene with a Pokeball, and it's about 2 minutes long, and that's by design. That was because one of the goals was to say we're doing something different. We're doing Detective Pikachu. We're in a new city. We're new everything. So because it was a totally different context for Pokemon, it made it challenging because you sort of are saying to yourself, well, are people going to come into this movie and say, well, where are the trainers? Where are the battles? Where are the tournaments? Where are all of those sorts of things? And so you have to kind of step back and say, okay, how can I make this feel different than those things that people are very familiar with? But at the same time, still as a fan of Pokemon, say, oh, this feels true to me. This feels like kind of spiritually or philosophically right, even though it's different than what I thought the first live action Pokemon movie was going to be. So that was a big challenge because we were very, I mean, we know how
Yeah.
fans are, right? And you don't want to run afoul of that and do something that feels like BS, and suddenly people are going, you don't know Pokemon, you don't know how, you're selling out this thing that means so much to me, and that we really didn't want that to happen. So I think that was the most challenging part, but ultimately also the most kind of liberating part, because it also allowed us to take more chances in the movie, because it wasn't the thing that everybody had known for all these years. It was a totally different thing that most people had no familiarity with, including people like my mom and people that had no reference. So we kind of had to find the right balance of, my mom can rate this movie, or the world's most
Yeah.
hardcore Pokemon fan can watch this movie, and they both have to be able
Okay,
to
so that's
kind
an
of get something out
interesting
of it.
chronology. So the Detective Pikachu game was out in Japan, and then this project starts. So that was kind of, if anything was kind of source material, it would have been the game. Is that right?
Yeah,
And
that's
so in
exactly
the
right. That's
game, I
exactly
haven't
how it
played
works.
the Japanese game. Like, was it just Pikachu was doing more than just Pika Pika, right? Like, or
Yeah, so he's talking in the game, and Tim Goodman is the main character of that game, but sort of the case that they're pursuing and a lot of the things that are different. It's a different case. It's um, a different story, but the characters are similar, and sort of some of the character traits are similar. And so it was up to us to say, okay, how can we take what they're doing and sort of make it into movie format? And then, of course, you add Ryan Reynolds on top of that, and that's a whole. Now you have to, now I mean, the most amazing actor and the most amazing comedic voice. So now you have that voice in your head as you're trying to create this character and
did you
define
know
it
what
for
that
movies.
voice was gonna sound like while you, like, during the script writing, or is it what order does that stuff happen? Did you even know any of that?
So sometimes you know the voices before you start writing. In this case, we actually didn't know it was going to be Ryan until later. And so once we learned that it was Ryan, a lot of work was done by us and by others to sort of bring that character voice more toward Ryan and how his persona is and how he likes to do things. And of course, we have Ryan Reynolds, he's improvising and he's doing his own thing because he's so brilliant at that. And so it really became a beautiful synthesis of this character that we sort of put on the page, and then he took it and just
All
ran
right.
with it
Well,
and made it his own
our
thing.
audience is full of people that have seen the movie, enjoy the movie. This is Detective Pikachu that we're talking about right now. So here's the benefit of having somebody who literally wrote the movie on with us. What is something about that movie that you don't think most people realize?
Something about Detective Pikachu that I don't think most people realize. That's a great question. Um, Every generation of Pokemon up until that point is represented in the movie, very much by design, and that was pretty hard because you know you can only put so many in. But one of the things that I felt was really important is I said we need to make sure that every generation of Pokemon is represented in some capacity. At least there have subsequently been, I think, a generation that's come out after that. But when that movie was released, I said, and I think I think it ended up being true in the finished movie, that I said, we really, you know, everybody started in a different place. For me, it was Gen 1, right? But someone else who's younger than me, maybe that's Gen 4, Gen 5, whatever. So I said, even as we were writing it, I said, let's really make an effort to be inclusive of every generation, so it doesn't feel like any one generation is sort of more privileged than another. Of course, some of them are, you know, the Gen 1 are so famous that you kind of felt like you had to include them, but we try to have good representation across the generations. And I even some that were sort of unexpected and sort of like maybe not popular, but like Mr. Mime, I think is a good example of one that I think a lot of people were really surprised with why he ended up in the movie. And the reason is, as a writer, when you're writing fantastical characters, especially characters that are like basically animals, and Mr. Mime is sort of like a guy, but also like an animal, you're looking for things that you can write that are identifiably kind of human characteristics. And so that's why I like Psyduck. Psyduck is anxious. He's neurotic. They get nervous and then they explode. And I feel like that's a very good sort of analogy for writers and for myself, I guess. So that's why. But that's, as a writer, you go, oh, I know how to write a neurotic person, whether it's like a guy or a duck. I can do that. And so it was similar with Mr. Mime, where you're sort of saying, okay, a guy, you know, a mime character that can only communicate in kind of funny ways, and then you extrapolate from that. Well, okay, if I had to interrogate this mime, how would I interrogate it? Well, I would mime a tough interrogation. I would like a mime torturing this mime, and we never thought that would make it. That was one of the things that we wrote where we said, well, obviously that's not going to make it in the finished movie, and then there it was, and it was like, okay, well, we really went for something. So I guess most people probably don't realize just sort of how much thought went into picking which Pokemon, and that's not just from us. That was from the Pokemon Company. That was from Game Freak. That was from everyone. Really like high level conversations about what was going to be represented.
All right, that is good insight there. We're gonna do Q&A, guys. We'll do it at the end. We're not gonna take too long with the but we're gonna kind of structure this in a way where the questions are at the end mostly. But while we're here on Detective Pikachu, I don't want you to get in trouble, but one common question has been, is there any sequel? So I don't know if we can talk about that.
So what I can say is that there are talks about a sequel. I think it was announced that there is a director, and I think that there's a writer on that project, and we are not writing it right now. But yeah, and that's not from lack of desire. That was just how schedules and stuff worked out. But the good news is I do believe that it is moving forward, or at least the last time that I checked in about it. And fingers crossed that that it gets there, because I would like to see it just as a fan, even if I'm not actively writing it myself. But I'm hopeful that will continue to be the case, and that they will continue to move forward on that, because I want to see where the story goes as much as I
just made some people happy, I think. So that's good. So all right, so Detective Pikachu, that was that project. It was a huge success. People love it. And then how the heck do you go from that to working? I mean, you got a call. They were looking for nerds for Detective Pikachu. So you had that success now, and then how do you end up working on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem? How does that transition happen?
So it was kind of a similar story, honestly. Is we were working with Point Grey, which is Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg's production company, on a different movie that we were really enjoying working on with them. And I think it was like 2 Christmases ago, around this time, actually, I got a call from one of the people that worked there, and I thought that they were calling to complain that I was too slow in getting this other script done. And I sort of answered the phone like, hi, like, sorry, I know I'm behind schedule. But it wasn't that. They said, hey, we've been doing this Ninja Turtles movie, and we're really looking for someone to step in and kind of work with Seth and Evan and Jeff, the director, to kind of take what they had and think of some new directions for it and some new ideas. And I think because of Detective Pikachu, suddenly I think people knew we were interested in writing in these kind of worlds. And it just so happens that Ninja Turtles is one of my writing partner Benji, and one of my very favorite things in the world. If we had to make a top 5 like dream project list, it would have certainly been on it. So we couldn't believe it. We were so ecstatic to be able to step in and come in at kind of a pivotal moment in the process. And so we kind of saw what they had worked on up until that point, and we all brainstormed together and sort of said, okay, what's working, what's not working, what should we do, how should we proceed from here? And we did a rewrite of the movie, and that rewrite ended up sort of forming the foundation of what Mutant Mayhem would go on to become, with a lot of evolution from Seth and Evan and Jeff, who are brilliant and continue to make the movie better and better and better. One of the weird things about being a screenwriter, unlike TV, where if you're running a show, you're kind of with the show from minute 1 till the very end. Movie writing is a little different. It really is like, here's a duration of time that you're doing this thing, and then maybe you have to go off and do a different movie, or maybe they have to animate the movie for a year or storyboard it. And so you're coming in at different points in time. And so in between those times, you're seeing the evolutions of these movies. And one of the things that I think is a mark of having done a good job is to say, can you go away from a movie for a year and then come back and be like, oh, that's pretty similar to what we wrote, but even now hopefully better than what we did. And that was very much the case with Ninja Turtles.
More profound when you're talking about like a purely animated movie versus like Detective Pikachu was mostly live action, right? So that the actors are there filming, so that probably makes scheduling a little bit more predictable, would you say, compared to a purely animated film?
So I think that what is both good and bad about animated films is, unlike something where a live action thing, you shoot it and then you have the footage that you have, and that's kind of what you have. And maybe sometimes on big movies, a lot of times they'll say, okay, we'll give you an extra week of shooting, but it's not like you can reshoot the whole movie. That's just not a thing that will happen usually. And maybe I'm sure there's some extreme circumstances, but like generally it's more like, okay, here are some targeted areas that you're going to have time to go, and you have a week or 2 weeks to do these. Animation is completely different. If you want to, you can throw out a whole movie multiple times. And as long as you can get it to the point where it needs to like go into what's called layout and animation, you can kind of keep taking cracks at the movie over and over and over again. That's great because you can keep perfecting it or keep trying things, but it's also can be bad because sometimes you're like, I've done this 100 times and I could keep doing it for 100 more times. And how do you kind of know when you're done, or how do you decide, are you making changes that are good changes or like lateral changes? Are you going backwards? In the case of Ninja Turtles, I have to say that, every iteration of the movie just got better and better and better and better and better. And so it was the right sort of trajectory. But on things like, I co-developed and ran a show called Koala Man for Hulu. You could just tinker with it forever. And it was like, yo, we need a new line here. Let's get the actor back. It's not that big a deal to have this person do a bunch of new lines. And so what's good about that is sometimes you're watching something and you're going, gosh, if we just had a line that was like a transition between scenes, this whole thing would work. And then you go, oh, well, let's just get that. Oh, great. Easy. When it's like, well, to get that in a live action, we got to get the same location or a similar location. We got to get the costumes. We got to get the makeup. We got to get that person who may or may not be available. Or should we fly them to London? It just becomes a whole other, it's just so much more complicated. So I would say like on shows that I've worked on that are like multi-camera comedies where you have a tape night, it's really more similar to theater, right? You do your tape night and then you have the footage that you got from that night and good luck. That's what you have to make the show with. That's scary because if you don't get a good thing, then you're like, oh, well, this one's just not going to be that good. But on the other hand, after one night, you're like, well, I don't ever have to think about that again. It's over. It's done. I can't go back. I can't change it. I can't like redo that scene. We
Right.
got what we got, and let's move forward. So I would say that there's really cool things about both, but also sort of drawbacks and scary things about both, which is kind of why I enjoy doing a lot of different things, because you get to
Yeah.
flex different muscles, I guess.
So,
as a
you guys, so if you're just tuning in, this is Dan Hernandez, the co-writer of Detective Pikachu and Turtles Mutant Mayhem. So right now we're talking about Mutant Mayhem. So if you're just tuning in, just catching you up. So Dan, you know, the story's great, the humor's great. Turtle and Mutant Mayhem, a lot of people, including myself, absolutely loved it. We'll get into that. But my first question is, this animation style, which was incredible. I mean, is any of that, as the writer, are you writing about any of that kind of animation style or any of those effects while you're writing, or is that just something the animation team takes first crack at, or how does that work, that interplay?
So it's really interesting. There's whole teams dedicated to basically every component of, especially a big movie like this. So you have your character design team led by the brilliant Woodrow White, who's like unbelievable. You should follow him on Insta. He's like amazing. So you have your character design, and then you have background, props, separate group of people. Like, but really, it is down to the director to sort of say, okay, here's my vision of what the visual aesthetic of this movie is going to be. Jeff Rowe and the co-director and everyone who worked on that side of things, they had a real sense of, we want this to feel like it could be in a high schooler's notebook that they were scribbling during class. That was sort of the big thought of how this is, and why, because this was going to be the first movie that really, or at least one of the first ones that really approached the new teenagers as real kids. So the thought was, well, if we're really approaching them as kids, shouldn't the visuals reflect that they are kids? And that, it's like, when I say it out loud, it seems obvious, but it's not a completely obvious way to do it, because I think a lot of times the tendency, especially in big movies, is to say, well, it's got to look perfect and beautiful and pristine. And it's a little bit risky to say, actually, no, we're going to make it a little ugly. The characters are going to be a little bit asymmetrical and like weird looking in some way. But the reason is because emotionally it felt right for the characters and the story that were being told. So we didn't have a ton to do with that, but the way that it intersects is, once they started showing us character designs and how youthful they were and how sketchy some of the things were going to be, that influences how we write it. That you sort of say, oh, well, this is going to be very kind of punk in a way, so let's write it in a little bit more of a punky style. Let's write it a little bit more youthful. Let's write it a little bit rough around the edges. It doesn't have to be perfect. They are talking over each other. They're being kids. So I think that ultimately what happens is that there's like a beautiful merging of worlds where I wish I could draw. I desperately wish I could draw. My mom is a professor of computer animation, a brilliant artist. I just didn't get any of that. But I sort of have it in my brain instead. So I have to use my like fingers to type it out instead of like actually drawing it. So by seeing what they were doing visually, it did inspire the material, because I sort of said, oh, I can sort of match the tone of what this movie could be to the art and the character design that they're already kind of, that's in process.
So, okay, so you saw the early character models, gave you a sense of kind of who you were going to be writing about, and then that kind of set the tone for maybe some of the direction that you took with the writing. Okay. And then to your point, like the imperfection, I mean, let's call it youth, right? Or just real life, which is everybody's imperfect, from your appearance to, your personality, whatever. That definitely comes through in the movie. And he definitely feels like they're young. The turtles definitely feel like teenagers. And the thing that struck me hardest in this movie, I think, other than, the humor, obviously, the other side of it is you got these teenagers, and it's kind of heartbreaking when they love the world above the sewers, and then the film does a really good job of making you feel just devastated when it's time to go back to the sewer and they can't be up there anymore. So I guess so that kind of dynamic between the youthful energy and you know, just the teenage part, and then now we have to go back to the dark sewer kind of thing. So I guess, is there any other techniques that you use to kind of make that really hit home other than what you've told us so far? Because the film does an amazing job with that.
Well, thank you, and I'm really proud of that. I mean, I would say the biggest thing that we talked about as a group, both the directors, the art, you know, Seth, Evan, all the executives at Point Grey, was how to make this feel emotionally true to being a teenager. And so a lot of the time you have to kind of access a headspace that maybe you don't love to access all the time, which is, what did it feel like to be in middle school, or to feel like an awkward freshman, longing for something, wanting to kind of fit in, wanting to be cool, wanting to have things that other people didn't have. There's the scene in the movie where they go to they're kind of sneak watching Ferris Bueller, and they're looking at the crowd and all the kids in the crowd, sort of just being normal teens. And we really tried to start from a place of what is the most emotionally true version of these characters, and hopefully the most kind of raw teenage version. And then everything was extrapolated from that. And that's sort of where Superfly came from, and the way that the other mutants are introduced, which is you're longing for this thing and you want to be included so badly. And then suddenly someone is like, not only am I like you, but like, come and hang out with us. Come in. You are awesome. I love the way that you are. Oh, one small problem. This guy wants to kill all humans. So now it's like, oh, we're so close to getting this thing that we wanted, but except actually in our hearts, we're heroes because of the way our dad raised us, because of the way that we've lived, and sort of our different perspective on humanity and on mutants and things like that. And so now you have just this really tough teenage thing, which is, I think, applicable to both a mutant Ninja Turtle and like just a regular person, which is, there's people telling me that I can be a part of something, but there's a part of me that's like, oh, I don't know if this is the thing that I should be a part of, even though I desperately want that connection. And so that was a real emotional anchor of the film. And by trying to stay true to those very human feelings, or human as we understand it feelings, it really allowed us to figure out what are the best scenarios for the action and for the mutants and for the funny, cool stuff, but always born out of this feeling of, well, what would a real teenager do if they just happen to be a mutant Ninja Turtle? And that was the more than anything, that was always the philosophy and sort of the thesis.
And if you're just tuning in, you guys, or you missed it, at the very end, we're going to definitely let you guys have Q&A with Dan, all right? So we'll ask him all these questions I see in chat. We're almost there. We're not too far away. I just want to keep working through this. So there was, you know, the other big part of this film, there's many, but like the updating of some of these classic characters to just kind of fit the modern day scene. It totally works. I'm an OG Turtles fan, and I mean, it's different. A lot of the characters have changes, but it works. So how do you just, was there like a collaborative process, like you and Seth or whoever? Like, how do you just write these changes, or who came up with most of these changes, or any specific ones you want to point out?
I would say that we did it as a group. There were some really fun sessions that we did with Seth and Evan and Jeff and some of the people at Point Grey, as well as me and Benji, my writing partner, where we would talk about all these things, where we would say, well, okay, because I'm like you, I grew up with the OG original Turtles, and I was a massive super fan. So was Seth, so was Evan, so these were things that were really close to our heart. But as writers, part of your job is to say, okay, well, it's not 1989 anymore, it's 2023, and so what do the Turtles look like in 2023? Well, you can't really tell a story about teenagers without social media, without updating them in such a way that they feel current, not stuck in time. And that's not a Turtles in Time reference, but sort of. But at the same time, there were conversations like, well, in the show, or the original cartoon, Baxter Stockman becomes a Fly Guy. And there was a conversation about, well, can we separate them? In the sense of that was kind of where the story wanted to go. And there was a real conversation about, well, is that violating something that ultimately will not feel like Turtles? Or can we do it in such a way that people like you will say, you know what, that's different than the way that I grew up with it, but it makes sense for the story that you're telling. And it feels really true to what the Turtles are and should be. And so even though it's different than how I grew up, I'm going to go with it because it feels like there was some real intention and some real thought behind it. So anything that was a bigger level change like that, we had a big conversation. And ultimately anything that we decided to change was because we said, you know what, this is different, but it feels true to the spirit of what we're accomplishing. And hopefully people will be on board with that. And thankfully, it seems like most people really were, which was really cool.
I think
very rewarding to see.
The themes and characteristics that we loved about the characters came through just in a in a different or updated way. So that's mission accomplished there. All right, so I just had Kevin Eastman on Elite Comics 11 for ACCON, our virtual comic convention, and of course Peter Laird. So the two original creators of Turtles. What role, if any, did they have in Mutant Mayhem?
So I think that Kevin and Peter were like very much, at least for me, I remember thinking to myself, I really don't want to let these guys down. You know, I really want to do right by the spirit of what we're doing. There's that wonderful shot in when the Turtles are first introduced that is an homage to the original cover. With the white eyes and everything. And that's very much intentional by Jeff and the art team, because we did want to have a continuity with the very original version of the Ninja Turtles. And I know that Jeff and Seth and Evan were very much in communication. At least I know with Kevin about things. You know, Kevin came out at Comic-Con, which was pretty awesome, even though, you know, like, because it was during the actors and the writer's strike, a lot of people involved with it couldn't be there, but Jeff was able to go and Kevin came out, which was so awesome. And Kevin was so generous and he said, I love this version of the movie. It feels true to us. It feels true to what we created all those years ago. And subsequently I've emailed with Kevin and he was just so nice and so gracious about his real love of the movie. And so I think that I know also that, you know, they were kind of consulted along the way and sort of said, like, does this feel like Turtles to you? And luckily it seemed like the answer was yes. So they were like such huge influences on everything about it, because we just wanted to do right by this amazing thing that they created and that still has relevance for, I feel like every generation has their version of the Turtles. And that's a really magical thing as a creator. I hope to have that myself someday with something original that I create, which is like, I'm 40, you know, but kids that are, my daughter is 4 and she's now, these are her Turtles. This is the version of the Turtles that she's going to grow up with and have a real affection for. And some people it's the rise of Ninja Turtle, you know, like the other series and all of the different iterations along the way. So I think that really we just try to do right by Eastman and Laird and make sure it didn't feel like Ninja Turtles in name only, but just that it was in spirit.
You definitely helped the IP make another generational jump. So as a fan of Turtles, thank you for that, because, you know, that kind of keeps what we love alive. So appreciate that. Okay, so you're writing, and then there's the animators doing their thing. Like, just give people a sense of how long does this take? Like, how long does production take on a completely animated film like this?
So this production, I mean, it even predated our involvement, which began about 2 years ago. And by the time that we came on board, there was already a lot of material. There was a whole storyboarded version of the movie that had been worked on by Brendan O'Brien, who's also a brilliant writer who was one of the people who had worked on this movie. So the short answer is these movies take a long time, years, 3, 4, 5 years, sometimes longer. But it doesn't always work like that. I also wrote the movie Addams Family 2, and we had about, I think they had about 2 years from script to movie being in theater. And that's a little bit more unusual, but it can happen that fast if everyone is motivated and moving in the right direction. So it really is dependent, on Turtles. It definitely had a pretty long lead time. And that's one of the other things about animation is animation takes a long time. And because you can continue to tweak it and because you can kind of work on it and iterate on it forever, it's only done because you kind of say it's done and it's time to send it out to movie theaters, but really you could make it just work forever. So sometimes it's
Yeah.
actually helpful to have a date in mind where it's like, okay, this movie is coming out in August of 2023.
Yeah.
There's nothing anyone can do about that. It's happening. So and there is a certain drop dead point where you have to say, okay, everybody, it's enough. It's over. So the writing itself can actually happen pretty quickly. But then what ends up happening is as you're seeing storyboards, you're going, oh, you know what, that joke, no, that's not working. Or the actors will come in and do something amazing and completely different, and then you go, oh, well, we have to have a callback to that later because it's so funny. Or then you have someone like Ice Cube come in, and that's a completely unique voice and a completely unique person who's so awesome. But you know, writing for Ice Cube is a different thing than writing for some other actor. And so now you go, oh, okay, well, we really need to go back and make sure that it sounds like Ice Cube, or it sounds like Jackie Chan, or it sounds like you know, Rose Byrne, whoever the case may be. So then you have, you know, sort of little adjustments along the way. So the truth is, like, the writing on these movies kind of never ends until you kind of
I mean, yeah, I'm sure it's not. It's probably really hard, especially because of what you talked about earlier, which is on the animated films. If an idea pops up, it's not too hard to actually technically do it. But at some point, you gotta call it, right? You gotta bring out the movie.
At some point, you just gotta say, this is what we got.
Yeah.
Hopefully, people like it, and we like it.
Yeah.
So
is that the most challenging part of production on Mutant Mayhem, or what would you say is what was the most challenging part of Mutant Mayhem?
You know, it was interesting. I felt like I knew these characters in my blood so well that it wasn't hard to write Donnie and Raph and Mikey and Leo, because I kind of felt like I've known them for 40 years or something, you know, or like nearly 35 years or whatever it's been. But at the same time, you can't just do the same thing over and over, right? You know, you have to evolve it. And so I would say the most challenging part was finding the sweet spot between, these are the Turtles that we know, this is Splinter that we know, but also saying, but how are they a little different in this version? How is this a 2023 movie? How is this a movie that's going through Seth Rogen's point of view, because he's such a comedic genius and you know, changed comedy, that if it's the Seth Rogen movie, which it is, and he was so involved in everything, you say, okay, well, how is this intersect with what Seth thinks is cool and important about storytelling? And so really it was kind of balancing all of those things to say we wanted to feel like the classic Turtles, but evolved, but different, unexpected, you know, that it's not something where you go in and you know exactly how the story is going to unfold, which is one thing I was proud about, because I think it is kind of unexpected, I think, the way that this particular story unfurls, and that was a real challenge, but a really rewarding one ultimately.
No, that's definitely true. Okay, so I think we want to open it up to chat, but before we do that, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked about Detective Pikachu. So, Mutant Mayhem, we've dissected it, we love it. What's something about Mutant Mayhem that you don't think most people realize?
Something about Mutant Mayhem I don't think most people realize. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to get in trouble. All I'll say is one of the characters has a name that is a very specific name.
All right. Sounds like enough of a hint there. Okay, and speaking of not getting in trouble, any future projects with Turtles that you can discuss?
I you know, I don't want to say too much, but I feel that the Turtles will return. And the Turtles will return.
So there were some people in chat that have been asking questions, whether it's about Detective Pikachu or Turtles Mutant Mayhem, or even the filmmaking process. This is the co-writer of both of those movies. So please let us restate those questions in chat, and we'll ask the man himself. We'll ask Dan your questions. So this is that time where we definitely want audience questions. So it's a good time for that. In the meantime, while we're waiting, because it takes a bit I will again say Dan is a comic collector. He recently had a birthday. That's how we connected. He picked up some awesome books for his own PC, so that's cool that he's a collector like us. Um, this gentleman, Clinton, he's been asking a few times about the Turtles. Were you aware of the plot of the Turtles being converted from tabletop role play sessions? You know anything about that, Dan?
No,
No.
that would it would yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, no,
So
that was not the
no
case.
there. Let me ask you this. And this I guess is a spoiler. Was there somebody on the team that was really fearful of being milked? where, where did that all come
Well,
from?
it's funny. It came from just us hanging out with Seth, and we sort of just were calling it milking kind of between us, like not really thinking that that's what was going to end up in the script. But then when we were all writing it, we kind of just put it in the script, and at least for me, I was like, surely this will
Surely.
change at some point. Someone will say, no, you can't do that, and then it just never did, and then became one of the funniest things in the entire movie. So it just goes to show you, sometimes it is like those inside jokes that you have with your friends that end up making it into these movies and becoming the thing that people remember about it. And so it happens a lot, and it's very funny. So that's where milking came from. It was just what we were calling it, kind of between ourselves.
It was
And then it just became what it was called.
So
and that
great.
happens
All right,
all
Digital Dissection is interested in talking about your comic collecting side. Is there anything you want to share about that? Anything you've picked up that you want to share, or things that you're after?
Yeah, well, it's funny. It's funny that you should say that. I just actually went down to Arsenal Comics in Newberry, here in California, who are awesome guys, just amazing shop, and they could really use some support right now. So I picked up a bunch of stuff literally today. So I'll give you a little.
Sure.
I'll give you a little show if you guys want. I got this guy, First Goliath, or Avengers Goliath. I had missed on this one, so I had almost bought it recently, and then I went back to buy it, and it was gone. So I was pretty mad about that. I'm gonna go from like kind of least impressive to most impressive, and then I got
First MODOK.
First MODOK. Shout out to Jordan Bloom, creator of MODOK, and Patton, my friends who created the MODOK show, which is awesome. And Jordan told me I had to buy that, so I did. Then I got this first cap today, which, well, it's cap 100, but it's sort of like the first,
renumbers,
sort of where it renumbers into cap. Then I got this bad boy, First Falcon. Got a little nick here, but my attitude, and we've talked about this, my attitude is not so much about the condition as it is about owning the thing. I really just like having it and saying, wow, this is something I've thought about for years, and there it is in my hands or on my wall or kind of displayed. So the condition to me is sort of secondary to the thing itself. With that said, check how beautiful this is.
Hulk annual.
The Hulk annual one, which is pretty nice. And now we're getting into kind of like the big boy section. I got them all. I just picked them up today, and so then I got
First Mephisto.
This beauty. First Mephisto. This is one that is a real grail for me. This Silver Surfer. this cover, and I'm not obviously many people feel this way, but man, what a cover! And then the biggest boy of the group was
Silver Surfer 1.
Silver Surfer.
So it looks like at least today it was mostly Silver Age Marvel. Is that mostly what you collect?
It's interesting. I grew up firmly make mine Marvel, right? That was like, and I always liked DC, but I always gravitated toward Marvel. Since I've begun collecting again more seriously, I've actually found myself really loving the DC stuff. It just so happened that it wasn't the collection that came in today didn't have as much DC stuff. But one of the books that you helped me get was that Brave and the Bold first Justice League, which to me with the Starro cover, which is just so iconic and something that I had grown up with the DC cards. I don't know, some of you guys are probably young, but when I was growing up, the Marvel cards and the DC cards were huge, and I still have them, and I have had them for 33 years, 34 years, sitting in the same binders, and so some of the cards that would come would have famous issue covers, and so something like that Brave and the Bold, I've been looking at it for 34 years, going, gosh, it would be cool to have that someday, but that seems impossible. And then because of Elite, I saw one that was, like not the highest grade, but it looked nice to display. It for me, it was perfect because it was, it was still obviously, when you talk about those kind of keys, like they're expensive, but it wasn't so expensive that I felt like my wife would throw me out. So it's just sort of my threshold. So I've really been trying to expand into the DC area. And then recently I got old Fawcett Captain Marvel from 1945 that I adore, and a Plastic Man as well that I think is really terrific. Sort of a pre-DC Plastic Man, or sort of whatever the history there is. And so I'm trying to I also have a really nice collection of underground comics from my mom that she has had for years. Zap Zero, Mr. Natural, a lot of R. Crumb, a lot of I have a really interesting collection of underground comics. And so what I've tried to do is sort of organize everything I have like a spinner rack at my house. So I have my underground section. I sort of have my independent section, what I'll call independent, which is like Spawn, Astro City, Next Men, the first appearance of Hellboy I picked up recently, which was really awesome. And so anyway, that's so I mostly gravitate toward Marvel, but I'm trying to be more open to things.
Have you got a Turtles #1 yet? Okay, good.
I do have a Turtles #1. I bought it for myself as a gift, sort of as a memento of the experience. It's a third printing, so it's not it's not the crazy $20,000 one or whatever, but I think it was $600 or something like that. So obviously again, it's expensive, but I felt like I wanted to commemorate the experience of writing Ninja Turtles as something that I could really look at and say, this is your reward for kind of having this experience. And now when I do look, I put it with all the Turtles toys. So I kind of have like a little Turtles section in my office at home. And it's just nice. It's nice to look at. It's nice to say, oh, wow, that was a thing I did. It's sometimes it's hard when you're a writer because so much of what you write never sees the light of day. So I do feel like when you have things that actually make it, and especially when people like it, that it's good to take a moment and sort of say, oh, that was a good thing. That was a really cool thing. I kind of lived my dream for a second, and it really worked. And so I did get that Turtles one as a reward.
Well,
for
that's great to hear. So Dan, I really appreciate. I don't want to take too much of your time. We're a little bit longer than I told you we were going to go. I appreciate you being here, being open to this. We're a valued member of our community. I think it's awesome that somebody who's working on the things that we love is actually collecting alongside of us. So thank you so much for coming on.
I so appreciate it. I appreciate what you guys do. I appreciate the Instagram especially, although it's a little dangerous when I see things and I'm like, can I afford that? And I'm like, no, I cannot. But every now and then something, but but what you said is exactly right. It's like I started as a fan. I can't ride a bike. I can't roller skate. I can't ice skate. But I've read a lot of comics in my life. I play a lot of Pokemon. And somehow I've been able to kind of turn that into my career. And if there's anyone watching that feels like they can do the same, you can. And I hope you will, and at least give it a shot. So thank you for, I thank you for my beard compliment. I appreciate it. In the chat. But yeah, it's been great to be here, and I hope that we can.
All right. Thank you, Dan. You take care, man. Appreciate you.